Before every franchise needed a cinematic universe, before every gacha game tried to pry open your wallet with anime tie-in events, and even before when a fighting game could be made without the expectation of guest fighters, we got the greatest crossover in all of gaming. The Ultimate Team, Toads and Turtles. What? That's the best timeline. Okay, well then, what did we get? Battletoads and Double Dragon. Battletoads and Double Dragon, the Ultimate Team. Yes, that is its name, I'm not mocking it. Released on the NES, SNES, Genesis, and Game Boy, is the crossover that nobody really asked for. And certainly no one expected. But the same could be said about Final Fantasy and Disney. And look at how that turned out. So let's give this one its fair shake. Hey gamers, Spammer D here. And look, I'm just gonna put it out there right now. I can't go any further without knowing how a bunch of street fighters ended up duking it out alongside anthropomorphic, intergalactic toads. Please game, enlighten me.
Gotcha, Prof, but we'll need some help. Get in touch with the dragons and we'll pick them up.
Billy, Jimmy, you're the finest warriors Earth has to offer. Can you help us?
Sure thing, Prof. We'll be ready to kick some evil butt. Tell the toads to pick us up at City Hall.
Is that it? Is that what we're going with? Is that all we get? I have so many questions. Like, why are they landing in space without a spacesuit? In a helicopter? Okay, whatever I guess. Wave it away with Battletoads logic. And let's be clear here, despite the villains teaming up and our heroes following suit, this is a Battletoads game, featuring the Double Dragons. Or, in other words, it was made by Rare and is brutally difficult. And, like most of the Battletoads games, it's a beat 'em up. Sorta. If you're someone who thinks Battletoads is nothing but a beat 'em up, I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that you've never made it past the turbo tunnels. Just calling it like it is. Anyway, you have your choice of any of the 3 toads or 2 dragons, but they all basically play the same, with only the most minute of differences between them. Like the dragons have a jump kick instead of a jump punch. There's no fast, medium, or heavy character variety here, a missed opportunity to be sure. And the fact that the dragons don't have their signature spin kick is it's basically just further proof that Tecmos probably didn't have much involvement in the development. Hopping off the helicopter, we find that this game follows the classic Battletoad formula to a T, as the game starts out surprisingly easy as a standard arcade style beat 'em up. You have your punch combo, a throw, jump attack, and running attack. The stage basically acts as a tutorial, and the first stage boss, classic Double Dragon baddie Abobo, is an absolute pushover. Certainly easier than he was in Double Dragon. Something that T-Bird will happily mention as he talks smack between the stages. Though it's here that we'll notice arguably the biggest changes between the systems, excluding the Game Boy version, which we won't be covering here. And that's the change in the visuals. Now, all 3 games sport that more cartoony, over-the-top aesthetics the Battletoads are known for, which holds up pretty well and really works with the goofy and surprisingly violent fights. Oh, wow, this might not have aged so well. I can't tell if this would be cheered on for equal rights or just flat out cancelled. Still though, gotta love these eye-popping moments, especially on the dragons, though they don't make out so well with the character art. But of course, there are some major differences between them too. Obviously, all 3 games look like titles for their respective consoles, like how the SNES version is the most colorful of the group, or how the NES version pretty much looks the same as the original Battletoads. But there are more subtle distinctions between them too, like how the Genesis and NES versions actually show you or your enemies beaten up after suffering damage, when the SNES version doesn't for some reason. Though that version actually has movement in its cutscenes, so I guess it evens out. But overall, visually, a lot of subtle differences, but nothing in any game that really impacts the gameplay itself. or at least nothing that would create much of a meaningful difference between them. The second stage is more of the same. You beat up some baddies as you make your way through the ship. It's still pretty easy. But then you see it, and the memories of endless defeats flood your mind. The turbo tunnels have returned. And it's extremely easy, giving you multiple opportunities for extra lives. What gives? Well, yeah, that's just the Battletoads way, luring you in, making you drop your guard. Then BAM! Insane difficulty spike. Yes, it's the third stage where the game reminds you that it is indeed NES hard, even for the SNES and Genesis. And that's because the game changes from an arcade-style beat-em-up to a side-scrolling beat-em-up, with a lot of focus on platforming and dodging obstacles. And here is where we start to run into a lot of the game's more prominent issues. But an unexpected one comes from the sound. While it hasn't been much of an issue thus far, the SNES version really dropped the ball in the sound department, particularly with the sound effects, which can really screw over some players. For example, this segment where you have to dodge the electric rings. Now, I'm a visual guy. I draw the thumbnails, so I tend to use visual cues when moving or dodging. I'm the DoubleDragon, by the way. But my partner in crime, Kigurumi, controlling the Battletoads, is an audio guy. After playing the Genesis version, Kiku found himself struggling to avoid the rings because he uses the sound effects for timing. Many of which were missing from the SNES game, which also takes away from the oomph of the action. Personally, I think the NES version has the best sound effects, though that might just be my nostalgia for the original game shining through. And really, we don't need things like that killing us. There are plenty of other cheap ways for us to die. Though the worst of the bunch has to be Stunlock, which happens a lot. When you take a hit, you don't get invincibility frames. Those only come after you lose a life. And there are lots, and I mean lots, of situations where that happens. Like in this segment, with the moving floor and crushing traps. Even the Governator, the boss of the stage, can pull that crap. Though to be fair, so can you. You can stunlock most enemies and bosses in the game if you time your hits just right. Though the boss fights also bring up another issue with the SNES game. For whatever reason, the music doesn't change when the boss fight starts. It just stays the same as it was during the level, killing a lot of the tension of the fight. But it's not a problem in the other versions. They change. And this is where the Genesis shines, as it has even more tracks than its Nintendo counterparts. And who would want to miss out on so many badass tracks in an action game like this? Even so, the challenge doesn't stop there, as at this point, the game swaps from a brawler to an asteroid-style shooter. Yeah, Stage 4, the worst stage in my opinion, has you basically playing asteroids on hard mode. And it just doesn't feel right, with back making you reverse, but the face button is how you move forward. Plus, you have to hammer the button to keep shooting. And if you can somehow survive this, then it shifts over to a more Galaga-style boss fight, which is much better, before finally returning to normal. Stage 5 is just littered with one-hit kill traps. And if you haven't already, this is probably when you'll start to notice that the co-op mechanics are kinda broken. Though, I bet it's familiar to anyone who's played the original Battletoads. When one player loses the last of their lives, instead of just using a continue right there, like in, say, TMNT, or stealing your partner's lives, or even just sitting out until your teammate dies, both of you return to the continue screen and back to the last checkpoint. But wait, it gets worse. The player that didn't use a continue doesn't get their lives refilled. So basically, if player 1 lost 2 lives and player 2 lost 3 and had to continue, they're both back at square one. But player 1 only has 1 life left. At this point, you might as well just kill yourself to even things out, so that player 2 doesn't lose any lives as progress resets when player 1 inevitably dies first. And yes, even if you get a game over, the other player is still sent back. What the hell? Really, if the co-op wasn't inherently a blast when you got a good buddy by your side, this would ruin it. Which is a shame, because if you've made it this far, you're basically in the clear. The last 2 stages are short and work exactly the same. A small lot of enemies show up and then a boss fight. And the last 2 bosses are much easier than they really should be at this point. The difficulty spike really is a spike. It goes up, it peaks, and then it just plummets back down. And that's it. That's Battletoads and Double Dragon, the Ultimate Team. The difficulty is completely unbalanced with some totally cheap mechanics, especially in the co-op. It's filled with some odd choices graphically. The SNES version really screwed the pooch in the sound department, and really, the Double Dragon franchise being workshopped into the game does kind of feel like an afterthought. But despite all of that, this one is actually a pretty fun game. While it is littered with problems, the goofy and bombastic combat is still a blast and can get a lot of laughs. And trying to abuse the stunlock mechanics to work in your favor is always cool. Hiccups aside, the music is still solid, and the visuals, even the insane ones, still kind of work in a way that only retro games can. And the overall challenge really does bring a rush that most modern games can't. While this game most certainly isn't for everyone, if you're a classic retro gamer, brawler fan, or Battletoads fan, then Battletoads and Double Dragon, the Ultimate Team, is worth checking out. Though I'd probably stick to the NES or Genesis versions.